Okay. Welcome everyone to CHICOS 2020 presents a virtual panel on reacting the Caribbean. I hope that everyone and their families are safe and healthy during these difficult times. We're very excited with the amazing panelists that we have today, and we're going to talk about reacting the Caribbean and hopefully getting things back to normal as quickly as possible and helping with the recovery. Before I let the panelists introduce themselves, I want to remind everyone of the dates we plan to host CHICOS, which will be November 8 to 10 in the Bahamas at the Grand Hyatt in Bahama. If all goes well, we'll be able to meet in person. We look forward to doing so with all of you supporting the region and reactivating the Caribbean for both business and leisure travel. We have a distinguished group of speakers that are joining me today. We have the Honorable Dominic Fede, who is the chair of the Caribbean Tourism Organization and also the Minister of Tourism for St. Lucia. We also have Mr. Alex Azoya, who is the executive chairman of Apple Leisure Group. We have Mr. Nicholas Hecker joining us, and he's the executive managing director and chief investment officer of Sculptor Capital Management. And we also have Dale McKinney, head global sales with Delta Airlines. Such a great panel, a group of speakers, and we look forward to having a very detailed discussion today. I just wanted to give very brief overview. Just prior to before 2020, we saw the Caribbean market doing extremely well in 2019. When you look at the overall hotel performance, the market had done exceptionally well. And also, there were a lot more visitors to the islands than in years past, with over 31.5 million. So the market was doing well, and then 2020 happened, specifically the coronavirus, which we all know impacted the region. This led to airports being closed, borders being shut down, and a lot of hotels being closed. The good news is a lot of the Caribbean islands were able to keep the virus in check. And when you look at infection rates in the region, they were far below the normal figures in different destinations. So I want to commend the Caribbean islands for acting quickly and doing a great job. And now that we're about to continue reactivating the region, opening up the borders, opening up hotels, the region is set to benefit because of that. And also because we're seeing a lot more activity surrounding opening up of the borders and opening up of hotels. This group of speakers are intimately and actively involved with the day-to-day process in the region from many different sectors, from the ownership side, from the airline side, government side, and the lending side. So we have a great panel. And what I'd like to do is have each of the panelists introduce themselves. And I will begin with the Honorable Dominic Fede, who is, as I said, the Minister of Tourism for St. Lucia and the chair of the Caribbean Tourism Organization. So I'd like for you, Minister Fede, if you could speak a little bit about your role, your responsibilities, and your exposure in the Caribbean. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Paris. We've never seen anything like this before. The entire Caribbean, we've been hit very hard. We are the most tourism-dependent region in the world. And so you can imagine the level of devastation. I think that the level and rate of annihilation on our very economies have been something that's incomparable with any other region in the world. In the case of St. Lucia, our revenues went from being at 110 million a month to about 50 million a month, to give you the kind of devastation that we have gone through. We've lost some 15,000 jobs. And if we went across the Caribbean, that would be jobs in the region of millions. You've got as well a situation whereby the private sector is finding it very, very hard. We don't know how many of the tourism businesses that are presently closed, whether they will be able to reopen. But COVID continues to be fluid. We continue to see that this is a virus of glorious uncertainties. And we are looking to approach this with a sense of optimism, a sense of resolve, and a sense of overcoming. I think it's the only way that we can. And we've got to believe that we can rebuild, because if we can't rebuild, then I believe that the situation in the Caribbean would be one that is equated to a crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Fede. I'd like to hand it over to Alex so that he can also introduce himself, his company, his responsibilities, and his exposure in the Caribbean. Alex, I think you're on mute.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Paris. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to join this panel with all of you. We are heavily exposed in the Caribbean and 100% exposed in the leisure aspect, which has been, as we all know, badly hit during this pandemic. We are a vertically integrated group where we have our main business is management, hotels, as well as distribution. So we have close to 100 hotels. We have 95 hotels where prior from the pandemic, 75 were already open. The other 22 are under development for future openings in the next 12 to 24 months. And with most of those hotels are based in Mexico and the Caribbean. And we also have distribution companies like Apple Vacations, Travel Impressions, Ship Caribbean, United Vacations, Southwest Vacations, etc., that represent about 3.6 million passengers a year from the United States, where more than half of those are going to the Caribbean. So we're the largest customer to the Caribbean on the distribution side. And we have other companies like Destination Management Company that also represents a lot of employment and excursions in the different, on the different islands and different destinations that we have. So pretty much we relied 100% on tourism, mainly coming from the United States. Again, Mexico and the Caribbean are main destinations, and we were badly hit. I mean, we went to a scenario of zero revenues, and still have all these expenses starting by the end of March. This company is in a range of $5.5 to $6 billion a year in sales and about 35,000 employees. So you can imagine the amount of people that is being uncertain during this time, but we're going through all these, and we start to reopen the hotels, and we'll get into detail later on. But we have already 40 hotels that are already currently open, and we're going to continue to reopen from now till the end of the year. So yeah, it is a very difficult situation. I want to be optimistic on the deep side of all of us. I think we're going to reemerge as better human beings, and we're going to appreciate things that we did not in the past. So that's a good thing. But when it comes to economically, I think it's going to take a few years to recover. We'll be back, but it's going to take a few years. It's not going to be a short-term thing.
Thank you, Alex. So now I'll turn it over to Nick. And Nick, can you just give us a brief overview on your company, your exposure in the Caribbean, and your responsibilities?
Sure. The name of the firm is Sculptor Real Estate. We are a real estate private equity fund based in New York. We focus on investing opportunistic equity and opportunistic credit in North America and in Europe. We're currently investing our fourth opportunistic equity fund, around $2.5 billion of committed capital. What has differentiated us historically from some of our brethren has been a much wider focus on different types of asset classes than traditional real estate private equity funds. And so that's where the Caribbean has come into play for us in our portfolio. We are now and have been historically both owners and lenders of traditional resort properties in the Caribbean, but also some more non-traditional activities, things like owning and funding for sale residential, vacation clubs, marinas, golf courses, etc. And so it's an area that we've invested in and covered for many years, and are obviously very focused on seeing it through the current crisis and the recovery beyond.
Thanks, Nick. So now I hand it over to Dale. And Dale, can you also give us some perspective on your exposure in the Caribbean? Tell us a little bit about Delta and your responsibilities specifically.
Hey, good morning, Paris. Thank you for having me, and good morning to all of you. I'm the regional manager for Delta in the Caribbean. I've been in this position now for 4 years. So I've seen us grow quite a bit in the past 4 years that even I've been in the Caribbean. I would like to just take a quick second and to thank everyone that has flown with us through the pandemic and stayed with us. And also for those customers that have not had the chance, we are here, we are ready when you are ready to travel. So more to come on that.
Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Again, we have a wide cross-section of speakers from the government to the ownership and operator, airlines, and lenders. So it makes for different point of views and will help tell the story, or at least help with the story as we proceed. So I want to begin with the first question to Minister Fede. Mr. Fede, you serve dual roles. You're the chair of the CTO, so you see the overall Caribbean and some of the issues, the challenges, and the opportunities. And then you have roles specifically as a minister in St. Lucia. Can you give us a little insight into the reactivation process, how some of the islands have opened up, and then specifically drill down on St. Lucia and the experiences thus far?
Yeah. Well, we have taken the lead here in St. Lucia because our Prime Minister has had a very long tenure in working in tourism, and myself being the chair. So that was a natural decision by the various CARICOM countries. So we played a very significant role in actually working along with various islands to see how we can get back to the fold. We were working amidst the backdrop of public health taking the lead. More or less, the role of a tourism minister was pretty much stymied, or if you can say hamstrung, because the public health situation of respective countries came before anything else. And so once that was the case, it became rather difficult for countries to even begin to think about tourism. The other part that stood in the way was the fact that our main markets, instead of their cases going downwards, we see that it continues to spiral. Now, if you had to make decisions for respective countries to reopen tourism, it became unimaginable to most citizens in the Caribbean to reopen their tourism sector or reopen your borders to countries that proved to be the high risk. And if you look at the Caribbean's main markets, none of them really have performed until recently. We see in the case of the UK and also Canada, they're beginning to stabilize in the number of cases, but certainly in the US, we see that over half of the states have recorded over 20% of new cases since the reopening of the US economy. That proved to be very difficult, and it was a stumbling block in the way. Then the next step was to implement the pre-testing protocol, and the CARICOM countries, the English-speaking countries in the Caribbean, decided that we're going to have pre-testing to give the population that level of comfort. But that as well proved to be difficult because the airlines couldn't implement this. And then the test then wasn't available in a number of the countries. And so instead of 48 hours, we went then to a 7-day pre-testing requirement within 7 days, which has proven to be a little more practical, but still people are finding it extremely difficult, and the wait lists in a lot of jurisdictions within the United States have become very, very tough. In the case of the UK, those tests as well are very, very difficult to come by. But I'm sure that Alex, as a hotelier on the call, will appreciate the number of protocols that were unleashed on the sector from having to screen individuals for fever temperatures every day. Some islands had the requirement to have a nurses or medical station if you didn't have one in hotels, to employees wearing face masks, to reducing the number of people that you would seat at restaurants to minimize the high density of individuals, to having the guests that cannot go on certain tours, and so on. So the tourism industry was confronted by a number of protocols which we have never seen before. And we're still unraveling some of these protocols. And we're still in the Caribbean trying our best to see how we can reopen certain aspects of tourism. Now, we see that with the opening of our borders, we also would attract the returning nationals to come back. And that in itself poses a great risk. How do you then manage guests that are going into managed protocol scenarios in hotels, and those that are coming back that are returning nationals that are going straight back into these communities, but they're coming from high-risk areas? Then you had to beef up your quarantine facilities to ensure that they go into a 14-day quarantine so that you reduce or mitigate the level of community spread that can take place within the respective jurisdiction, because there's a very strong link between the public health success and as well any talk about tourism reopening. You had to ensure that the Caribbean, first of all, get the public health situation right. And I think that we did that successfully based on the number of cases that you see in the respective jurisdictions where the Caribbean pretty much has been identified as a low-risk COVID jurisdiction. We see many countries in the Caribbean being enlisted in a travel bubble of countries around the world where they have waived the quarantine requirement for their nationals to go back. So between travel restrictions, increased protocols, in addition to the management of the COVID-19 situations in respective countries, pose a significant challenge to the reopening of the Caribbean.
All very valid points, and some of those we're going to circle back to later in the discussion, specifically around the protocols. I want to turn the next question over to Alex. And Alex, can you give us an update on the status of the AM Resorts properties throughout the Caribbean? Which properties have been opened, when they opened? I know you have other properties will be coming on stream later this year. And if you could just give us a little insight into the process where you had to close the properties, then reopen the properties. And then, I know it's a long-winded question, but how is it different in the light of COVID-19 as well?
Yeah, thank you. Well, we have, as I said, we have 75 hotels that were open prior to COVID. And out of those, 40 are back, they're open. And out of those 40, 11 are in Spain. We have hotels in the Canary Islands and the Balearic Islands. So 11 are there, and the other 29 are in Mexico and Dominican Republic. Pretty much the only two destinations that we have opened is different places in Mexico, from the west coast of Mexico to the Caribbean part of Mexico, Cancun, Riviera Maya, Cozumel, and but it's 27 of them, and only two in the Dominican Republic. And the Dominican Republic, we are facing a lot of confusion now, and unfortunately the demand, when there's confusion, the demand is not strong enough in order for us to support reopening. And that's a different topic, but I hope we can put our act together in the Dominican Republic and avoid the confusion and start opening back. And then on the other destinations in Curacao, San Martin, Costa Rica, Panama, and Jamaica, we will open over the next few months. We're having additional hotels opening in August. Only 2 additional in Jamaica and 2 more in Dominican Republic. But then the rest we will not open until the months of October and November. And we'll continue with the development that we have in other places in the Caribbean, hotels that are not open but are on the different stages of development in other places, including St. Lucia and Aruba. But they will not open certainly this year. But we won't be really back in business until November. And then the last hotel that we're going to open in the Balearic Islands will be for the next spring season, because the summer season ends up in September, and then the hotels will close down. Naturally, they will close down anyway. But yeah, coming back to the business, it's been expensive. I mean, the working capital that is necessary to reopen the hotels is like when you open a hotel from scratch. But in addition to that, the cost of the protocols, that makes it a lot more expensive to operate. And running the hotels, particularly the all-inclusive space, running the hotels with low occupancy, it becomes a very expensive and a per guest basis operation. Where honestly, we're not trying to make money in the short term. We're just trying to lose less money than the money we lose when the hotels are closed. And of course, we need to reactivate the industry. One of the things that I would like to convey to everybody in the Caribbean, but not just from the hotel companies, but also within the destinations, is we should not try to make the protocols a competitive advantage of our destination, of our company. I think the protocols should be unified. They're not, and they're a mess. In the Caribbean, there's so many jurisdictions, so many different countries, and they have different protocols, and there's a lot of confusion, and that's a big problem. Hopefully we can unify it into one common language and one set of standards and protocols. And I know we're eventually going to do it because the best practices are going to rule. But it's going to take longer time. It's going to take forever if we don't start doing it purposely and deliberately. The implementing common protocols, but that is becoming very expensive and for everybody. But the islands shouldn't take the protocols, or the companies shouldn't take the protocols as a unique competitive advantage. We should all be now concerned about reactivating the industry. Then we concern later on about gaining market share. But right now, in the short term, it's all about reactivating, going back to business, have the people on those planes, and going back to the destinations. That's the main goal we should all have as an industry. And then we'll talk later about how can we gain market share for our companies or for our destinations. But it's been a challenge. I have to say the guests are not really behaving once they're in destinations. One of the reasons why there's a lot of a new spike of cases in the United States, particularly in the South and within the young crowd, is because a lot of people, they forgot already that there's a pandemic out there, and when they come to destination, it's difficult. Of course, the staff follow the protocols, and we try to enforce and recommend the protocols to the guests. But in reality, once they're already in the pool, once they already have a couple of drinks, once they're on the beach, unfortunately, they're not really behaving like we were during the pandemic. But of course, they're there on holidays, and this has to be a right balance. They must have a great experience. But that's a challenge. That's one of the challenges that we have.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And then, you raised many valid points. One, talking about standardizing protocols is something I'm going to get back to. I want to get everyone to speak, but then I'm going to go back to the minister on that topic. And then the second other point that I think was very relevant and pertinent is reactivating the entire region so that everyone benefits in the long term, like getting all the hotels reopened, the destination reopened, and having the airlines bring people more and more to the region. So we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. The next question I have is for Nick. Nick, obviously, these are some very difficult times for owners and investors in the region. I understand that a lot of lenders are working with owners that are unable to meet their financial obligations. Obviously, in these times when the situation gets worse, there's the possibility of having distressed assets in the market. Are you seeing any of that, or is it too early in the game? And if it is too early, what needs to happen before we get to that point for like distress opportunities or just investment opportunities out there?
Sure. Well, I think, first of all, it's obviously difficult to talk about opportunities in the midst of significant human suffering. And so certainly want to acknowledge that. In terms of what we're seeing in the market, I think about it in phases. The first phase was the public markets reaction, where you had a pretty narrow set of opportunities, all coming out of sell-off in the public markets until the Fed stepped in April. And the Caribbean does not have a lot of exposure or representation in the public markets, and so there wasn't a tremendous amount of things to do at that phase. The second phase, which is where I think we are remain today is assets that had issues going into COVID, where COVID was sort of the final nail in the coffin. And, it could be a situation where there was too much leverage, where there were ongoing development delays or challenges or budget busts, some operational issues. That's been sort of the limited universe of opportunities that we've been seeing in this sort of second phase. I think the third phase, which I think will play out over a much longer period, and will probably form the bulk of the transactions that take place coming out of this, just sort of the regular way gaps in the capital markets where an asset either gets forbearance periods or can cover debt service, but gets to maturity and there isn't cash flow, so there's really no ability to refinance. And that leads to something needing to happen in terms of a transaction. Again, I agree with Alex that both obviously on an operational side, but also on a capital market side, it's going to be a very long, protracted recovery. And so as a result of that, while we've seen a pretty limited set of transactions over the past couple of phases, we think it's going to slowly roll out and accelerate, but again, over a very, very long period of time.
Thanks, Nick. Dale, can you give us an overview of the destinations that Delta is currently providing service to in the Caribbean, and when you restarted providing service to those specific locations within the Caribbean?
Yeah, absolutely. So currently we're back in Jamaica, which they reopened mid-June. Nassau, Bahamas opened July 1st. St. Thomas, San Juan was pretty much continuous service since they're considered U.S. St. Lucia, we just started back to Punta Cana, of course, last week. Aruba, and that's it. So that's where we are currently. We do have plans to go back to those previously served destinations, of course, depending on demand and government regulations when they open. But we do have plans to go back to Bonaire, St. Martin, and Turks and Caicos as soon as those destinations are open.
Okay, so Dale, let me ask you another question. It's obvious now that we're operating in a different world since COVID-19 has impacted all of us. Can you spend some time explaining how air travel has changed or is going to continue to change, and how that experience is now and how it's going to be? And what should customers expect? How is Delta making travel safer for customers?
Yeah, we've, like you said, things have changed, and I think passengers will see the change as soon as they walk through the doors in the terminals around the world. We've invested in resources and to add layers of protection throughout the travel journey. We've kind of coined the Delta Care Standard, which focuses on keeping surfaces clean, giving customers more space, offering safer service, and just that personal care at every point of the journey. You're going to see with the Global Cleanliness Organization that we created and launched just in the recent weeks, that we're going to innovate cleanliness and on an ongoing basis into the future. This is going to be permanent for us, and to get more customers back to travel, bringing the same focus and rigor through the data and tracking cleanliness that we've been known for with our customer expectations on reliability. So this is here to stay for us. We are changing the HEPA filters on the aircraft twice as often as recommended. These are the same type of filters that are used in hospital operating rooms. A quick note, a lot of people get confused with how clean airplane air actually is on board. So to give you a note, that aircraft air is recirculated every 2 to 5 minutes with fresh outside air or through the HEPA filter, which extracts 99.99% of the particles, including viruses such as coronavirus. 100% of our flights are sanitized before boarding with the high-grade spray, and we wipe down all of the high-touch surfaces, such as armrests, the monitors on board, seat belts, the handles on the overhead bins, restroom handles, anything that is high-touch. Everything is wiped down along with being sprayed before every single flight. Through September 30th, as of right now, we have blocked every middle seat on every aircraft. So along with that, we've got the 60% capacity cap in the main cabin and 50% in first class right now. And that's through September 30th. We're boarding 10 customers at a time from the rear moving forward. So for those of you that have been traveling for a long time, we've reverted back to the old way of doing things. Employees and customers are required to wear masks across all Delta touch points as a consistent layer of protection. And we found that in a recent WHO study, found that 80% of people who wore a mask, the COVID-19 infection rate would drop 90%. So we again, this is why we have went the direction that we have required everyone to wear a mask throughout the process and on board. In June, we implemented some complimentary kits. So if you do not have a mask, you don't have that hand sanitizer gel to bring with you, we do have kits at all the ticket counters and at the gate that include the Purell hand sanitizer gel and a face mask. And that has had overwhelmingly positive results for us. Beginning mid-July, so here in just another week or so, we will voluntarily implement a new health acknowledgement process for all customers. During the check-in process, customers will be required to acknowledge any personal symptoms or exposure to COVID-19, as well as agree to the face mask requirements throughout their travel experience with us.
Dale, this is all great information. I feel a lot safer hopping on an airline now. I just hope we could get that word out to all the people so they could hop on planes to get to the Caribbean and travel elsewhere. So yep. Great insight.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Minister Fede, circling back, so we touched earlier on the protocols. Is there like a standardized protocol? Is it possible to have all of the islands form like a standardized protocol for travel so there's no confusion? As we know, it tends to, with the confusion, it can hamper the recovery and make it slower. And each island may do it a little bit different. And obviously there's US territories, there's overseas territories, there's independent nations. So I'm sitting here asking this question and it may be a lot more difficult to get to that answer. But the region is seen as one region, right? When the traveler is booking a trip and they want to go to the Caribbean. So I think it's important that we work towards that. But with you being the chair of the CTO, is that something that's been discussed? Is that something that we could possibly work on to help with the recovery in any way?
Well, the CTO, CARFA, CHTA, along with the OECS and CARICOM, together those organizations have led the way in coming up with a common set of standards. But the economic situation, the public health situation, the legislative situation in respective countries in the Caribbean all differ and vary to country. And so therefore, what we have had to do was to leave some wiggle room for individual countries to have some level of identity, if you will, so that their protocols can adjust to meet their situation. But I believe that generally speaking, all the protocols in the Caribbean are standardized for hotels, for airports, and certainly for passengers that are coming in. The pre-testing varies from country to country, but we work together on developing a set of protocols to activate the entire Caribbean.
Thank you. So Alex, in the past, we've spoken about the importance of a destination being lively and there's vitality and basically creates this hub of entertainment and people want to go there, they want to travel. And we've seen some of the destinations have slowly been opening up travel. 1 or 2 hotels have been opening in different islands. Can you speak a little bit about the importance from your perspective of this process or reactivating the Caribbean and having a lot of the islands open and a lot of hotels open and flights coming in and out, as well as entertainment?
Sure. If we all wait for the markets to come back and the flights to come back and the demand to be increased to the prior levels in order to open, we're never going to open. So we saw the case, for example, in Cancun, Riviera Maya, as well as in Cozumel, where as soon as you start reopening, the demand starts to increase. The customer doesn't want to go to a graveyard, doesn't want to go to a dead destination. And I think the fact that we start to reopen and the travel agents start understanding that destination is open, there's things to do, and there's enough supply and there's enough options in order for me to consider sending my customers there, as well as the consumer themselves when they book directly, to understand the destination is open for business. There's more hotels open. That means things are under control. When you have a destination, there's only 1 hotel open and everything else is closed, you won't trust that destination as much. Besides, you question how good of experience you're going to have when you go there. So it is important that we take the first step and open the hotels, even if the demand is not there yet, because that supply, that additional supply will trigger additional demand. We see that happening very rapidly. In the case of Cancun, it came back officially in business in June 8th. Actually, the whole state of Quintana Roo, also Riviera Maya, Cozumel, June 8th. We opened in June 15 with very, very low occupancies, but we start capturing a lot of the share of short-term bookings, people who want to go travel in the short term, because there weren't that many options open. So we start capturing that to the point that some hotels had to limit their occupancy because they were already at 40-50% occupancy. And we, of course, we have to measure the distance and the protocols of not running the hotels at 100% occupancy. Again, I'm not saying there's enough demand for everybody, but all I'm saying is the effect of reopening supply has a strong correlation with additional short-term increase in demand. So, and I think it depends more on the hotel side than on the airline side. I think the hotels are open, the airline is going to come back and put the seats as long as the demand justifies that opening. So that I think that is very, very important. And you know what? Take advantage that the cruise ships are not there yet. Again, I think the dependency in the Caribbean on the cruise ships has been such that in a crisis like this, it really puts us on the spot. And I think that the long-term investments that we have on the hotel side and the average spend per guest, plus the taxes and all of the benefits that the customer that goes and stay in a hotel and spends more money in the island generates more jobs. Right now, without the cruise ships in the short term, is proving a lot of people love the Caribbean regardless. They don't have the option to go on a cruise ship right now. So if the hotels are open, I think they're going to come. One good example is Cozumel. I think that Cozumel is, for us, is having the highest demand from all of the hotels in anywhere in our portfolio. One of the reasons is because in the short term, they don't have the cruise ships. And by the way, being an island under these circumstances, it's a competitive advantage. I know it has other disadvantages when it comes to cost and all the other things, but one of the advantages is that you can control more and you can make you safer in an island environment than an open environment. So I think I would take the short-term opportunities, reopen, and again keep the business coming. The demand will increase as soon as the supply start to come back in business.
Okay, thanks for that insight.
So if I can just compliment Alex's point there, Paris, just very quickly. I think it's imperative the Caribbean take this lead because it's one of the safest COVID 19 jurisdictions with one of the lowest cases of COVID in the world. I think that the longer we take as an industry globally to show customers that there is a safe way to do this and the risk is very, very low, I think the harder it is for us to open. So by making this first leap and to start the reactivation of tourism in the Caribbean, you're sending a very clear message to travelers all over the world that might be contemplating to go to other destinations, that there is a safe way for us to do this. And as well, there is an innovative way, and that tourism is innovative enough to coexist with COVID.
That's a good point, Minister. Thank you. And with the reactivation, we all know that funding is critical and very important. So now I turn to Nick. Nick, despite the negative impacts associated with the coronavirus, we're seeing that the US government has been doing a good job with keeping the economy pretty much stable from an economic point of view. And there's a lot of capital for investment. You know, I've seen the stock market the last few days, and it seems like we're living in an alternate universes from my perspective. How do we accelerate a recovery for the capital markets, so for the capital market standpoint, with the hope of attracting more capital to the Caribbean region specifically for investments?
Well, I think it's directly related to what both Alex and the minister said, which is ultimately it's going to be performance that attracts the capital markets back. And I think notwithstanding how severe the immediate term challenges are, if you think about the long-term secular shifts coming out of the pandemic, I would much rather have exposure to leisure than to business travel. Because I think it's, you know, what people have realized sitting in quarantine is they really miss going on vacation. And they're also realizing that maybe they can do without that marginal business trip to Chicago that now can be done over Zoom. So I think the long-term sort of secular prospects are very, very strong. The irony is that from a capital market standpoint, that traditional city center business hotel, a Marriott or a Hilton in downtown Chicago, something like that, has historically had much, much easier access to the capital markets than certainly a Caribbean resort. And I think what changes that is because the markets are reactive and they're usually a step behind and then maybe they overreact. But I think what changes it is when you start to see openings and people start to see real strength in demand. And I think that's going to be a much different story between leisure resorts and city center business hotels, which I think will struggle and have a much longer road to recovery. The capital markets will notice that, and you know, potentially you'll see sort of this secular shift. As with everything on this topic, it's going to take time. But the more that the industry can do to publicize numbers and highlight how much the demand is there, I think will really differentiate leisure overall from business travel and hopefully put it in a pretty strong position in the future, just in terms of capital markets relative to how the capital markets had perceived it historically compared to traditional city center hotel assets.
Great. So now, Dale, it's all up to you to bring all those folks to the Caribbean on Delta planes, you know. So Delta has always demonstrated their belief in the Caribbean. They've supported the Caribbean with their presence and exposure. It's obvious, right, that island destinations need airlift. Unlike Mexico or the US, where there's drive-to markets, we depend on airlift. We can't drive to each other's island. How does Delta as a company view the Caribbean? Do you guys view the Caribbean as an attractive market? And if so, can you expand?
Yeah, Paris. Delta has always viewed the Caribbean as an attractive market for us. Our customers, tell us that just by flying to the different destinations in the Caribbean. It's important to note that this pandemic has affected, air travel on a global level. We have been able to add back capacity into popular vacation spots, like I mentioned earlier. Having said that, we are the schedule is subject to change just based on those the evolving nature of COVID-19 and customer demand and government travel regulations. So we realize there is demand there, and so when the time is right, we definitely will continue looking back at those destinations. Okay,
thanks. I guess we've seen some recent spikes in the southern states, and I'm going to speak to Alex a bit and then the minister. But so Alex, for your group, I know the U.S. is your main source market. Obviously, in the high season, you get a lot of business from everywhere. But in the summer months, you tend to get a lot of business from the southern states. If I'm wrong, correct me. With the recent spikes that you've seen in some of those southern states, how is that impacting your booking pace? And how do we adjust? How do you recommend we adjust to that reality that we have no control over?
Yeah, that's true. No, in the short term, it's impacting us, unfortunately, up to like the beginning of June. Even the first half of June, we saw a good pacing back from the southern states, particularly Florida, Texas, and of course our hotels on the west coast of Mexico from California. And we saw a good pacing coming from there, which is a season where the source markets are very active in the south of the United States. But unfortunately, with the recent cases and spikes, we've seen a lot of short-term cancellations. So we went from a net positive new reservations versus cancellations to a net negative in the short term for the months of July and August coming from the southern states. So that is very unfortunate. That's moving as we speak. Every day there's new things that are coming back. I don't know how bad it's going to be, but of course people are taking that into consideration and canceling short term or postponing the vacations short term coming from the south, which is very unfortunate. The good news is that other markets in the U.S. Are year-round markets. In this case, for example, Chicago, certainly New York, even Philadelphia, that they are continue to book for the short term. But in the South, I don't think there's much we can do because, of course, health is first, and they're having some important issues. So yes, we struggle with the short term situation with them. Hopefully, they can pass that and understand what Delta and other airlines are doing, and don't mix the things, what you can do and what you cannot do. I think traveling is still relatively safe versus other activities that you do when you're not traveling.
Thanks. Minister Fede, I know the region has done a great job, and your group in St. Lucia has done a fantastic job. I've read there was 0 infections. Correct me if I'm wrong. I take my hat off to your Prime Minister and your government for keeping that number at 0. At the same time, your job is probably extremely difficult because on one hand, you have to protect your citizens, but then on the other hand, you have to bring in all these tourists, and there's a fear with some of them being impacted with COVID-19. Can you speak a little bit about that balance that you have to endure? And then what are your thoughts on the recent spikes in the US as Alex also alluded to?
Well, I think that Paris wants you to continue to give people information as much as possible. You educate them that you're doing everything possible to protect their health and safety and to prioritize that. It's important that that comes from the government's narrative. And we have done exactly that in saying to people that, listen, our hotels are down, but if we do open up, it will be in a very safe way. And what will happen, it will be your health and safety. I think that some people would have trusted the successes we would have had in the public health objectives in keeping the country with a very low rate of COVID incidents. And that every time we made a tourism decision or an economic decision, it was always one that had a very strong public health justification. And so as a government, we gave our chief medical officer and the Ministry of Health the very best support that they can receive, because we do recognize, because of the dependence on tourism of the Caribbean and St. Lucia, that if we have a public health situation that is not attractive, then we would not be even talking about reopening. That is going to be an impossible task. Invite people to come visit a country where the cases are going up rather than going down. To the second part of your question, as it relates to the cases in the US, this is actually unfortunate. The Caribbean depends on the United States tremendously for its economic survival and for its tourism industry. And we can't wait for the US to get the situation under control, because this is hurting not only the US, but it's also hurting us significantly, because our economic fabric is so inextricably linked to the successes of the United States. And so we are hoping and praying that that situation will turn around and the United States will indeed have an attractive public health situation where we don't have to worry about nationals that are coming. We've put one layer to help to surveil this and have some level of assurance, and that is the pre-testing layer, to see how we can determine what is taking place with every single customer that is coming into our country. I know that that's very difficult for Dale and his team from Delta, because they have got to help us to police this and have an extra level of precaution to look at, and that is the precaution of making sure that everyone that gets on the plane is tested to come to St. Lucia. So not only is this affecting the way that hotels operate, but certainly airlines are having a significant change in the way that they have had to operate.
Thanks. So we're approaching close to that hour where we're going to have to wrap it up in a few minutes. I'm going to ask one more question to Nick, and then I'll ask each of the panelists to just give us their closing thoughts for about like a minute each. So Nick, the current market basically has some positives as well as negatives. Like, I believe there's a lot of pent-up demand. There's going to be limited new supply coming in. And as you know, interest rates are extremely low. On the flip side, there are unknowns, right? There is the unknown with airlift. When will the coronavirus end? And when does consumer spending return, and how does it return? Can you walk us through how your group looks at opportunities to invest, and what makes a deal a positive, a non-positive, a non-starter? And I know airlift is really critical to your group as well when you look at island destinations for investing.
Sure. I think there are a couple of levels to it. I think there is a first sort of set of threshold questions that are kind of the binary, would we even consider this set of questions? And those are things like airlift. I don't think this is a time where you take risk around a market that historically might have had very, very limited airlift. But more importantly, things like stability of the legal system, how good your operating partner is. Frankly, right now, is it an existing asset or is it ground up development? I think the bar is very, very high for ground up development. Beyond those threshold issues, it then becomes a question of how are your returns relative to the risks that you're taking in a deal. The things we look at there are, historically, how did a market perform, both in terms of how did other assets perform cash flow wise, but also is there a history of assets selling above certain levels? Is there sort of a depth to the capital markets in a certain area? What's the composition of your return? How much current cash flow are you generating? So you're not really relying on back end exit value as much. And again, how much risk are you taking around things like a significant redevelopment versus sort of a more modest PIP type renovation. But clearly, I think from a return standpoint, the bar is higher now than it would have been 6 months ago. One of the benefits of the Caribbean has always been, it's just been less levered than more traditional real estate asset classes. And so when you're thinking about returns, you're coming off of a lower leverage capital structure to begin with, which just inherently sort of helps de-risk what is a riskier asset class. And so the incremental return that I think you need to earn now is probably not as dramatic as in much more highly levered asset classes, but clearly the bar is pretty high.
Got it. Thank you. That's great. All right, so we have just under 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask everyone to give a 1-minute synopsis, so any closing thoughts that they have, and then I'll wrap it up. I'll start with you, Alex. Can you go ahead, please?
Thank you, Paris. Very quickly, the efforts need to be done in between private and public sector, and I'm just going to refer to 5 of them. One, as I mentioned, is standardize the protocols. We must speak a common language to avoid confusion, because the confusion is what is going to hurt us with the fast recovery. 2, invest in promotion. We need to invest in the promotion, not just as a region, but highlighting the uniqueness of each of the islands, because each destination is different, and we should highlight the uniqueness. But invest more in promotion. Don't stop that. Don't stop that for coming. 3, be careful with the pricing. Pricing is going to be affected dramatically because of the lack of demand. So we got to be very careful, because prices, if occupancy is going to take some time to go up, pricing and rates are going to be taking even longer. So careful with pricing. 4, reduce dependency on cruise ships. As I mentioned, I think we have to incentivize all of the other sectors in these islands and depend less on the cruise ships. And 5, please reduce the level of bureaucracy and red tape in the islands of the Caribbean. We must move faster, and we be a lot more private sector oriented. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Dale, can you go next, please?
So, we're providing updates to our customers about our actions we're taking to ensure their safety, and so that when they're ready to travel, they can be confident that Delta is providing a safe experience from check-in to baggage claim. So all of that information can be found on delta.com. And like I said earlier, when you're ready to travel, we are here for you.
Thank you. Nick, your turn.
I would sort of reiterate one of the topics I touched on earlier, which is when you think about long-term secular trends, there is a real opportunity coming out of this to position leisure, and the Caribbean in particular, as a much more institutional and frankly stable asset class than it has been perceived as in the past, certainly relative to traditional business travel. And so the things that the industry can do, I think, to facilitate that are, to the greatest extent possible, transparency in information, sharing data, making sure it's as easy to underwrite a hotel in the DR as it is a hotel in downtown Chicago. And similar to that, the legal regimes, tax structures, all that, to the greatest extent possible, that is simplified and isn't seen as sort of an impediment to capital being able to invest in a market the same way it could invest in Florida. That to me is what could really transition this from a recovery to a real repositioning and secular shift.
Thank you, Nick. And Minister Fede, you get the last word.
Yes. I think just like 9/11 would have changed the way we travel and do business in the tourism industry, I think that COVID-19 has certainly changed the way that travel will take place for good. I'm very, very proud of what the Caribbean have been able to do, and what collectively working with our international partners to do the first phase, and that is to take control of the public health situation. And having done that, I think now we're in a good place to now reactivate the tourism industry to rebound. I think COVID-19 exposes the fickleness of tourism, but we've always bounced back. We've always shown the great resilience of this industry. And I have no doubt that working with airlines and hotel chains and financiers and investors, along with the workers of the people of the Caribbean, that we will be able to recover from this as we have recovered from so many difficult situations. And so I want to thank all the travel trade and the tour operators and all stakeholders for the tremendous support they continue to give to the Caribbean on behalf of the Caribbean people.
Thank you, Minister. I want to thank everyone, all of our panelists. This has been very insightful. It's been great. Thank you for the time. I also want to thank everyone that tuned in. I hope that everyone stays safe, that your families stay safe, and that I look forward to seeing each and every one of you at a conference sometime soon. CHICOS, again, will be held November 8th to 10th in the Bahamas at Bahama. Thanks again, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paris.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Boris. Thank you.
You're very
Thank you.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.